So I'm going to try to use a bit of a trope, you could say, to illustrate exactly what one could mean by the virtuality of the self. So, see if it works.
This is such a false dichotomy, and that's what they're. So, Gary, I'm probably the last person you want to hear from about this issue, but nonetheless, I think some part of you is really drawn toward the conflict in it all.
The frustration that comes along with interacting with others about your own ideas, because you've made almost 900 videos, and you're pretty angry in most of them, but nonetheless you continue to make them. So at some level you depend upon conflict. You're addicted to it, you could say. It's interesting that you made this video about virtual reality and that it's coming up again in our discussions here on YouTube, because just the other night I watched Thomas Metzinger, the cognitive scientist's videos about his idea that, well, essentially we already live in a virtual world, or at least the phenomenal self, the ego that we think we are, the I that has our body, the me that is behind the image that you see, the me that is essentially who I am, rather than, the behaviors you may observe the me trying to accomplish. That sense of consciousness, Metzinger says, doesn't exist, and the world that consciousness experiences, the illusory world that it experiences, is virtual. It's a production of the brain and the body. So we already live in a virtual world, and so one of my professors back at UCF, Sean Gallagher, wrote a critique of Metzinger's idea, or his book, really. It's called Being No One, which basically says that, yeah, the phenomenal self, the body image, the I that we talk of as having a body, is in a sense a virtual identity. But then once we've realized this, we have to then accept that our body, our whole body, the physical, process that we are, that natural science looks at and says, yes, that is a phenomenon that must be explained. It's a real entity. That body is real still. So while this particular mode of consciousness called the ego does appear to be a bit of a figment of our imagination, a ghost, our real identity, though, as a consequence of that, is our bodies. And the reason our bodies make us real is because there's a risk involved in being a body. There's a consequence to each one of our actions, and even our thoughts, to the extent that they are actions, to the extent that they influence our brains and therefore our bodies, at least eventually. Everything that we do, whether it's an idea that we think of, or a moral action we perform in the world, each of these things calls us to take a risk, to offer our best guess as to what we should do next, never knowing what it will be until it happens. And this seems to be a prerequisite for there to be consciousness at all. The ego can act as though it's somehow not the body, and we talk ourselves into thinking, that somehow that talking self is immortal and lives past this life. But it can't be a reality. Scientifically, when you look at the physical body, there is no such thing as an I. There's this process, this physical process. And that process, as I said, is what we are, therefore. If the ego is an illusion, we are the process. And so our being is really a becoming. And as such, to experience anything at all, we must meet resistance. We must not know what's going to happen next. We must not have total free will. We must have some world which we have to encounter. But we also enter that world. We move through it. We act in it. And through this resistance, we come to experience being alive. And now, Gary, to get back to your virtual reality idea, if we remove all conflict, if we give the ego a perfect world where it can have whatever it wants in any moment, with not even the snap of a finger, just thinking of it gives it to you. And presumably you would know what was going to happen in every future moment. And so who or what would you be at this point? What is that experience really like? Have you ever gone through it? Have you ever thought it through? Like, what would you do? Plan it all out. If you could have anything, I don't even think you'd be able to feel anymore after a while. You'd just go numb because you get bored. There's no risk. Nothing you do could possibly surprise you. Nothing you encounter could possibly surprise you. And so life ceases to have a meaning, which is why I think virtual reality of the kind that you're talking of, it basically amounts to suicide. Because it's the same rejection of the possibility of newness, of life, of becoming. So we are a body, or at least that's what I think we say. The I that thinks is first a body. It first has to become in a world with other becoming bodies.
Before it's an I that thinks, it is that relationship. The I that thinks isn't anything independent of that relationship. And so if you give that I that thinks a world, a virtual world independent of its body, it ceases to exist. Or at least that's what I think. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, do that.